today in Rich in Relationship. We're going to talk about what's really driving those resentments that seem to be killing your partnership. And because we're dealing with what's urgent all the time, we lose sight of the things that are important but not so urgent. Agreement, communication, structure, boundaries, role clarity. This helps them to feel more safe. When resentment builds, trying harder and harder and harder isn't going to fix the problem. Sometimes you need to step back, reset, and realign. Welcome to another episode of Rich in Relationship, and I'm your host, Rich Heller. I am your tour guide on the road to purposeful and prosperous partnerships. And today we're talking about roles, hats, and the roots of resentment. I should have worn a hat today, right? A listener writes, I feel like I'm doing everything, parenting, managing the house, keeping us on track, and I'm starting to really resent my partner. They're not lazy, but somehow everything still falls on me. I just want to feel like we're actually in this together. And I want you to know, I could have written this about 30 years ago. There are times for every partner in the marriage where they feel like they are carrying the load. It's the silent overload, and resentment grows. You're doing what you're supposed to be doing. You're doing what's right for the kids. You're being the best person that you can. There might even be a good reason why you're carrying the full load. There certainly wasn't my case. And yet, you can't help but be resentment. Even though intellectually you understand the other person has something that's in the way that you just can't help them with, fix for them, or change them, you still resent the fact that you're choosing to carry that full load. It comes alive for me even now as I talk about it. You feel like you're emotionally invisible, right? Why don't they see that you're doing, if they would just show some appreciation maybe? Well, what we all hope for in those circumstances is that this is going to change, that there's going to be mutual support, that it's going to be fairer, that there's going to be a clearer system, a return of goodwill. And I'm here to tell you that unless your partner does have a seriously disabling problem, that is fully possible. Brad and Gwen. Remember Brad and Gwen? They co-run a boutique design consultancy while raising two kids. Woohoo! You go, Brad and Gwen. That's mad responsibility. They're growing the dream business and growing the dream kids. Gwen had somehow become the household COO, exactly what I was crying about in my first marriage. She made sure that all the communications with the kids, friends, other parents happened with the schools and everything, the kids' schedules, meals, emotional tone. Brad handled the big picture situation in the house, and this carried over to their work. Brad was the big picture guy at work, and Gwen made sure that all the details happened. It was a great and thriving relationship. In fact, it is not an unusual situation. My own situation that I was talking about, I was actually married to someone who had a mental illness, a disabling mental illness, and wasn't getting help for it. But Brad and Gwen don't have that going on. In their situation, Gwen is just managing all the balls in both households, and Brad, he's the big picture guy, or she feels like she's managing it. Resentment simmered under the surface. You know what I mean by simmer, right? It's not like it's volcanic, it's just kind of bubbling. And it comes out in little ways. It doesn't go volcanic because it comes out in little, either overtly aggressive acts, like making dinner for yourself and the kids, but not your partner, or passive-aggressive acts, like just dropping a ball unconsciously that happens to impact your partner in a way that unconsciously you know is going to trigger them, but you didn't do it consciously, so it wasn't intentional, so it's okay. Gwen says, I didn't sign up to be the manager of everything. And Brad said, no matter what I do, it's not the right thing. Because you see, the situation that Brad was in was, even though he was doing stuff, Gwen felt totally overloaded, and so he got no credit for what he was doing. And he wasn't giving Gwen credit either. This is not an unusual situation. And because they weren't clear, they were doing this kind of naturally. They were leaning into their skills. They were doing what we all do, right? They're feeling overwhelmed, and so they lean into their natural skills to lessen the sense of overwhelm and make sure that the necessities get taken care of without actually taking the time to get organized, to see when hats are being changed, to see when roles are changing. And it's in those circumstances that we feel not appreciated, because we're scrambling to get the kids to school and fed and make money and work at the business and have the business grow so we can pay for the house. We're scrambling. And because we're dealing with what's urgent all the time, we lose sight of the things that are important but not so urgent. Like, wow, Gwen, you do an amazing job of organizing our social life. Or, Brad, thank you so much for dealing with that roofer. Important, not so urgent. Brad and Gwen were drifting apart. They were leading parallel lives. We used to call it parallel life syndrome here at Rich in Relationship. And the reason was that they were reactive rather than proactive. And the difference here is when we're proactive, we see what's coming and we set the intention and we delineate clearly responsibility. And we set emotional boundaries for ourselves. We talked about this in the last episode, so that as things come up, we're better prepared. When we're reactive, we feel overwhelmed. Oh my God, this is happening. Oh, the dishwasher stopped working. What am I going to do? And it just gets worse. So Brad and Gwen came to us with this problem, and they had a good income. They had trouble making time to do the work with Rich in Relationship. But they knew that if they didn't do the work, everything was going to go down the drain. In our early sessions, it was clear that it wasn't about motivation. It's clear that it wasn't that neither of them wanted to take care of things. It's that sometimes they were taking care of the same things. Sometimes some things weren't being taken care of. And there was no appreciation for anything that was being done because each of them felt they were carrying the full load. We can't appreciate the other person when we feel like we're back on our heels. We can't appreciate the other person when we feel like we're under constant attack, even if it's not by them. So the first thing we did was we broke down all the tasks in both ecologies, the work ecology of the home ecology. We designated responsibility according to skills. And that wasn't hard. Honestly, they had mostly done this already. There were just a bunch of areas that they hadn't done it with that needed to be assigned. We helped them to, even though they weren't having the fight, they were avoiding the fight. The fight, in case you haven't been listening to Rich in Relationship before, the fight is that negative, I'm going to win, you're going to lose fight. That means that you both people lose. Why do both people lose? If you're in a partnership and you win at the other person's expense and they're your partner, if you're tearing your partner down, you're actually tearing yourself down. You need to get that a partnership is a form of relationship that has equal ground with individuality. Not that it becomes more important than individuality, but in the same sense that we won't allow others to tear us down, all right? We don't allow ourselves to tear down the partnership because that would be tearing ourselves down. They didn't have the fight going on, but they were avoiding the fight. And because they were avoiding the fight, differences weren't getting resolved constructively. They were getting resolved through petty actions and sarcasm and snippiness and passive-aggressive acts and overtly aggressive acts. And so the first thing they needed to learn was how to talk about their feelings in a way that felt safe. The first thing they needed to learn was how to talk about differences in a way that felt safe, because they avoided talking about differences altogether, because differences would mean having the fight, and they weren't going to do that based on their history and experience. Once they had the tools for communication, then they could start to talk about, I thought you were doing this. I thought you were doing that. They could start to talk about, hey, you know what? Maybe neither of us can do this. Maybe in our boutique design company, we need to hire someone who can do this because neither of us really does it very well and we find it stressful. Maybe we need to hire someone to help us with the house cleaning. Maybe we need to hire someone in the same way that Brad managed the roofer. Maybe we need to hire someone to drop off the kids and pick them up. And one of them is responsible for that. Not both of them. One of them is responsible for that. So he started to brainstorm how to solve these problems instead of jumping in temporarily and then giving the impression that it's taken care of. And then when it comes up again, having the ball be dropped. You see, they got clear on roles. They got clear on how to communicate. They got clear on the fact that difference is the root of creativity. Difference is where synergy is built. And what they signed up for with Rich in Relationship was a synergistic, prosperous partnership. Once Brad and Gwen understood that the systems breakdown and the communication breakdown, everything changed. They had a system for communicating. They had a system for checking in on workload distribution to make sure neither of them felt too overwhelmed. They had a system for, if they both felt overwhelmed, for planning for the future so that they didn't feel overwhelmed. They created interim agreements that reflected reality, not some naive, idealistic idea that it'll just work itself out. There were things that Gwen handed off to Brad at work, and there were things that Brad took on at home because he saw that it was too much for Gwen, that she was too tired, and that he might even be better at it. They built temporary structures to contain that dynamic of avoidance, communication structures to contain that dynamic of avoidance. They agreed on boundaries for decision-making. They created guidelines and traditions for managing, expressing their emotions in ways that felt safe to both of them. They created rituals, daily rituals, weekly rituals, monthly rituals for staying aligned. And it wasn't perfect, but they stayed aligned because they had regular contact and they weren't avoiding contact like they had been in the past. When you're avoiding the fight, you avoid most communication except basic logistical communication. They had a structure with which to engage in that kind of communication that they've been avoiding. And it wasn't perfect. And stuff happened. They made mistakes, but they learned from them. You see, we have to make mistakes in our relationships to learn. The question is, am I going to learn when the mistake is a seedling? Am I going to learn when the mistake is a sprout? Or am I going to learn when it's a giant weed taking up my whole marriage? Like, let's say, spending more money than we have, or maybe investing in a different kind of relationship with someone else that won't be named. Agreement, communication, structure, boundaries, role clarity. This helped them to feel more safe. It helped them to communicate calmly. It helped them to restore trust. It helped them to restore intimacy. And they realized they really did still love each other. So here's the deal. Brad and Gwen learned that when resentment builds, trying harder and harder and harder isn't going to fix the problem. Sometimes you need to step back, reset, and realign. You need to step out of crisis mode and step into being proactive. We introduced to them the Eisenhower decision-making matrix. The Eisenhower decision-making matrix has 4 components. It has important and not important. It has urgent and not urgent. And what Brad and Gwen found is that they were addressing what was urgent and avoiding some of the important things. If an important thing was urgent, they addressed it. But if it was important and not urgent, they didn't address it. Regular communication is important, but never urgent for people, sadly. Right? Having a marriage that works is about building in time. Having a business that works is about building in time for what's important and not urgent also. When couples communicate better, when they talk about the important but not urgent things, they start designing their life better. They start being planners. They start being proactive instead of reactive. Let's save the reactivity for the real stuff in life. We don't need to be reactive with the people we love, unless they're really going off the rails. Sometimes we do. And how often does your partner really go off the rails? I want you to think about that. Hey, if you're liking what you're hearing here on Rich in Relationship, we want to thank you for being a subscriber. Or maybe you're becoming a subscriber. You're hitting that subscribe button right now. You're sharing this with your friends, helping us get the word out. Because really, having a healthy, happy relationship is a very simple thing. It's not always easy. And what we do really well here at Rich in Relationship is educate people about how the mind, body, brain chemistry works, how to manage it, and thus how to have the emotions in a way that feels safe and express emotions in a way that feels safe so that we can be proactive and plan and move towards a prosperous partnership in life and in work together. Thank you for subscribing. Look forward to see you on the next episode of Rich in Relationship, which is, I don't know. So let's do that ending again. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you for listening so carefully. Thank you for sharing us with your friends. Have an amazing day and a fantastic tomorrow.